to discuss the theory that Ari mentioned. Shout out to Ari in Jacksonville. Do you want to kind of kick that one around? Is that something you wanted to discuss on the podcast? Interesting theory.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if this is an ongoing conversation about the show The Acolyte,
Yeah,
when we haven't seen its completion yet, and
right.
on a pretty limited run,
Yeah.
where really the majority of the story momentum and action took place in one episode after four
hmm
episodes of what we love on here on the PoodooCast, meandering and not really going
Right.
anywhere and not really showing us anything. A lot of stuff happened at once. So episode 5 was a pretty big one, leading in directly from the end of episode 4, obviously. Um,
Yes.
Spoilers, obviously, if you haven't watched The Acolyte,
Yeah.
by the time this
Spoilers.
is
Spoilers.
published, it'll probably be finished. But there are still 2 episodes to go. The sixth episode just released. I believe it was last night or right last night or yesterday.
Yeah. Last night was the 9 p.m. Eastern time. Is it 9 p.m.? I assume it's six comes out 6 p.m. then Pacific
I guess
time,
6
right?
p.m. Yeah, I watched it with Gavin last night, and
Okay.
his quick review was that he thought it was the worst episode so far. And
Nice.
as much as I don't love the show at all, I immediately
hmm
disagreed with him. I was like, no, very, very clearly to me, episode 3 was the worst episode of all, the most pointless episode so
Yeah, it's
far
pretty dumb.
out of 3 episodes, where they spent the whole episode showing you exactly what they had told you had happened in the
hmm
previous 2 episodes without
Right.
any change. I mean, unless episode 3 turns out to be a lie, that flashback was
Yeah.
false, that there's a false memory implanted or some nonsense about it, that they were
hmm
misled about what they remembered. I mean, OSHA specifically, because I'm pretty sure that was her memory. We
Right.
talked about OSHA. We talked about the show last week. I know we did. So I
We
think this
did.
makes sense. This makes sense to keep talking about it. But yeah, there's 2 episodes left. And tell us what about Ari's from
Ari
Jacksonville
and
theory.
Ari pulled the two of us aside because he wanted our take on it because he knows we're the experts and he asked very astute question. It had occurred to me a little bit too. I'm gonna throw that out because I want to seem smart too. But Ari was the first one who brought it up, and so he gets the full credit there of asking: Is the stranger played by Manny? Is it Jacinto? Is that or is it Husito? I don't know how to pronounce the last name, but
No
great
idea.
guy from the really funny on The Good Place. I think he's doing a really nice job acting
Oh, right.
this
He was the guy
part.
from The Good Place. That's where I knew
Yeah,
him from. He was funny on that
yeah,
show.
he was, and he's a good actor. Is he Darth Plagueis?
I mean, I thought as soon as Ari said it, I think
hmm
it was probably something that we all had in the back of our minds,
Right.
because we're talking about the Sith
hmm
resurgence. We're talking about the show is called The Acolyte, so it's about
Right.
the attainment or training up of one of whom
hmm
we don't know who that is, as he obviously makes clear. The acolyte that he was trying to have, which was May, was a failure
hmm
to him. It
Right.
makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense to me, but the only reason why I don't think it makes perfect sense, and I don't know how this makes me seem, but knowing what we know of Palpatine, Sheev Palpatine, former senator from Naboo, becomes Chancellor of the Republic, becomes Emperor Palpatine, becomes a clone of a shade of his former self later on. I don't see someone of his stature, of his kind of, I don't know how to say it, of his not classiness, of his sophistication in how he
There you
presents
go. That's a good
himself,
word. hmm
coming from someone who seems to be as disheveled and
hmm
physically smaller than him. I don't know how I would see little Sheev Palpatine unless he changed tremendously from when he was
Yeah.
younger. Unless again, it's just a ruse, because then again, these guys do play roles. I mean, look at what
Right.
Qimir pretended to be, basically a
hmm
bumbling, falling asleep on the job provider of something that was never really sufficiently explained. So it really wasn't such a surprise to find out that he was, in fact, the Sith Lord. In fact, I'm sure most
Right.
viewers who were paying attention called it as soon as they landed on um, Kofar, as soon as they landed on the
hmm
planet. And he was with her, and he was like kind of urging her on and saying, "Here, let me go get you some water. Let me go help you out." Like he certainly had more. It seemed like he had more at stake with her, more invested
Yeah.
in her than he needed to, and it wasn't like a romantic thing.
Right.
So as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, he's the guy. And I said it to Gavin when we were watching. I was like, oh, he's the Sith Lord. And then
Yeah.
she tied him up and took off. And so that was clear when what's his face? The Wookiee. Tell me the Wookiee's name that we never even got to say.
Kelnaka.
Kelnaka. When Kelnaka Dot was dead, I mean, who else would have been able to do it? So it was him.
Right.
I just don't see him as the stature, and I think that episode 6 was an attempt to give him a lot more gravitas than we had seen from him before, a lot more measured wisdom coming from his mouth than we had seen before. Though, as you rightly pointed out in the conversation with Ari from Jacksonville about this topic, the Sith, or whatever incarnation of them we're experiencing now, are manipulative and they're liars. And they say and do whatever they can to get their ends. So you legitimately can't believe anything that they say ever. Which, again, if you go back to previous incarnations of the Sith in Star Wars, specifically I'm referring to the tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise as told to Anakin Skywalker by Palpatine in the Opera House in episode 3, the beginning of episode 3. Most of me, although obviously Palpatine was very clearly trying to take Anakin on as his apprentice at that point, most of me then, and even still now, believes that Palpatine was lying to Anakin, that story was made up by him. Although I think it came out later in non-canonical stories that Plagueis was a real person and that he really did do some of these things. That Palpatine was saying to Anakin exactly what Anakin wanted to hear in order for Anakin to move closer to the dark side, which is can bring people back from dying, can save people from death. And that's the one thing Anakin really wants to be able to do. And so why not say to the guy you want to have on there, not that there doesn't need to be, I mean, clearly, I don't know. It seems to be established that trust and honesty between Sith members isn't paramount to the relationship. It's shared power. It's my power grows and so does yours. Yours grows and so does mine. I don't necessarily need to tell you the truth all the time in order to get your power to grow, to get your anger to manifest, to get your fear and all these emotions that are deep down that make you more powerful with the Force than a Jedi could be, according to Qimir in episode 6. I don't necessarily think that anything he said to him would have to be true in order to get Anakin to believe him or to get him to move, because he's being manipulated. I mean, you see throughout his whole life associating with Palpatine in those bits and pieces as he did in episodes 2 and 3, he was being manipulated by Palpatine. Palpatine was always saying to him exactly what he needed to hear in order to get him in that direction. So that coupled with this guy, I mean, maybe again going against type, going against what your expectation was of who this guy was. I assume a somewhat monstrous looking, towering figure who just is the personification of evil in how you see him. And that's usually what you see in a Sith who isn't hiding himself as well as Palpatine did. But again, I contradict myself.
Or Count Dooku, for that matter. Although, again, even Count Dooku
has a regality to him. They had a regality. But again, it could have very well been an act. If you're saying that Palpatine was a sniveling, hunched over, robe-wearing, decrepit, jerky guy who just, straightened his back up and started speaking a little more civilly, a little more properly to make his way through the machinations of politics and governance of these things to get himself into power, then maybe that's the case. Maybe Qimir is that I mean, clearly he is that talented. So I guess I contradict myself in this circular thinking I'm doing out loud about this, that sure, I guess it very well could be him. But then we took it a step further, Jeremy, did we not? Or at least I think I did in our conversation, that it would only make sense that he's Darth Plagueis, because if he's not, then this whole story is completely irrelevant to Star Wars as a whole. And it would seem very clearly, if this is a series focused on the Sith's ascension in Star Wars, then it has to be associated with Palpatine. And therefore, if what Palpatine was saying is true, this has to be Darth Plagueis. Or maybe he himself is a student of Darth Plagueis. Again, another figure that we don't see and we won't see. Maybe this guy will be dispatched by the end of the series, and we'll learn who the big bad is, the real Phantom Menace behind the scenes, who is his master.